You don't know true, agonizing patience until you've sat across the dinner table from the woman who meticulously dismantled your childhood, smiling politely while you quietly plot the total annihilation of her future. They say time heals all wounds, but that's a lie sold to the weak. Time doesn't heal, it incubates. It sharpens the dull ache of betrayal into a razor-edged weapon of retribution. If you've ever felt powerless, ever watched someone tear your life apart while the world applauded their grace, listen closely. Because power is an illusion, and the mightiest ivory towers can be brought crashing down if you know exactly which foundational stones to pull. When I was 10 years old, my father, Vance, brought home a woman named Odette. On the surface, Odette was a vision of maternal warmth. She smelled of expensive lilies and vanilla, her voice a soothing cadence that immediately disarmed my childish defenses. I liked her, I trusted her, but beneath that saccharine exterior beat the heart of an absolute monster. It didn't happen overnight. Predators like Odette never reveal their teeth until you're already locked in the cage. It started with small, insidious things. My favorite possessions would vanish, a silver locket from my late mother, a cherished sketchbook, and Odette would feign deep concern, only for me to find them later in the outdoor trash bin. When I cried to Vance, Odette would sigh, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder, whispering about my concerning need for attention and my habit of misplacing things. Naturally, he believed the woman sharing his bed over the child sharing his blood. The psychological warfare escalated. She would lean down, her breath hot against my ear, and casually mention that Vance loved her far more than he ever loved me, that with a single snap of her fingers she could have me shipped off to a boarding school where no one would ever visit. She found my private diary, read my deepest, most vulnerable thoughts, and casually recited them as dinner party anecdotes to humiliate me in front of guests. She even called the animal welfare authorities, claiming I was starving and kicking my rescue dog. I vividly remember sitting on the front porch, trembling with entirely unwarranted guilt as stern-faced inspectors combed through our home. They found a perfectly healthy, happy dog, but the seed of doubt was firmly planted in the neighborhood's mind. The worst part, the darkest shadow over those years, was how she weaponized my own father. Odette was a master conductor of Vance's temper. She would feed him a steady diet of exaggerated lies and fabricated disrespect, winding him up until his frustration boiled over into rage. Eventually, he would snap. He became her enforcer, a puppet dancing on her malicious strings. I hold Vance entirely accountable. He was a grown man who chose his own actions, but Odette was the venom in his ear. She encouraged the heavy hands, the bruised ribs, the nights spent locked in my room without dinner. By the time I turned 16, I was a hollow shell. I was miserable, navigating the darkest trenches of depression, genuinely contemplating whether checking out of this world was my only escape route. But then a miraculous shift occurred. Vance and Odette finally separated. The romantic spark had fizzled into toxic resentment. However, because they were financially tethered, they still co-owned the large house on Elmwood Drive. It was during this purgatory period, sitting in the silence of my own shattered adolescence, that my profound despair crystallized into cold, calculating fury. I decided I wasn't going to be a victim. I was going to be the architect of Odette's ruin. I didn't just want her to hurt, I wanted her entire existence to collapse simultaneously. Odette worked as a civilian property officer at the county police evidence warehouse. It was a job requiring the utmost integrity, a trait she entirely lacked. She had always been greedy, and I noticed things. A pair of confiscated designer sunglasses casually resting on her head. Small bundles of unbanded cash tucked into her glove box. Once, a Ziploc bag of loose, brightly colored pills that definitely weren't over-the-counter medication. Naughty Odette was skimming from the seized items. I began my surveillance. For 2 months, I kept a meticulous, encrypted digital log. I recorded the dates she brought home foreign items, cross-referencing them with the times she worked alone in the holding bays. When the dossier was thick enough to bury her, I set up a secure, untraceable email address. I forwarded the entire compiled list of missing inventory, complete with dates, descriptions, and photographs of the items in her car, directly to the precinct captain and internal affairs. The hammer fell with breathtaking speed. Within 48 hours, Odette was abruptly suspended pending an audit. 2 weeks later, the audit uncovered massive discrepancies perfectly aligning with my anonymous tip. She was publicly frog-marched out of the precinct, entirely disgraced. They didn't just fire her, they charged her with grand theft and possession of a Class C controlled substance. Odette was now unemployed, facing a criminal record and blacklisted from any job requiring a shred of background checking. Phase 1 was complete, but I was just getting warmed up. Unemployed and drowning in legal fees, Odette desperately needed cash. She could no longer afford her half of the mortgage on the Elmwood house. Vance also wanted to sell the property so he could move on with a new girlfriend. So I made it my mission to ensure that house became an unmarketable, festering tomb. Vance and Odette shared a glaring security flaw. They were arrogant and lazy. They consistently left the rear utility door unlocked. I didn't need a key, I just needed timing. I knew their schedules intimately. When the house was empty, I slipped inside like a ghost. I didn't trash the place. Vandalism is loud and easily fixed by insurance. I opted for biological warfare. I bought bags of cheap, raw prawns, let them sit in the humid summer sun until they began to turn, and then carefully sliced open the bottom hems of the heavy velvet curtains in the living room, sliding the rotting seafood inside before supergluing the fabric shut. I visited a local reptile supply shop and purchased bulk frozen feeder mice. After thawing them, I shoved the tiny corpses deep into the intricate ductwork of the HVAC system. I unscrewed floor grates and dropped them into the dark recesses of the subflooring. I even slid a particularly flat, dead mouse directly inside the zippered casing of Odette's memory foam pillow. I dumped live crickets and feeder roaches behind the massive pantry shelves, ensuring a constant, unsettling chorus of scratching in the walls. Within a week, the house emitted an odor so profoundly offensive it triggered an immediate gag reflex. It was a thick, cloying stench of death and marine decay that seeped into the drywall. The real estate agents were horrified. They hired deep cleaners, but you can't scrub away a smell that is literally baked into the air vents and curtains. Viewings lasted less than 2 minutes before potential buyers would sprint for the front lawn, gasping for fresh air. Estate agencies eventually refused to list the property, deeming it a biohazard. Odette was trapped, financially bleeding out, her credit score plummeting toward absolute bankruptcy. Yet, Odette had one final lifeline. For the past year, she had been dating a wealthy, oblivious man named Merrick. Merrick was a good guy, successful and tragically blind to Odette's true nature. He had even proposed, offering her a golden parachute out of the miserable life she had curated for herself. But Odette, ever the narcissist, couldn't help but self-destruct. While she wore Merrick's diamond on her finger, she was enthusiastically sleeping with Silas. Silas was Merrick's own father. I discovered this vile little secret during my stakeouts of the Elmwood house. I recognized Silas's distinct, charcoal gray luxury sedan sliding into the driveway on Tuesday afternoons, right when Merrick was buried in corporate meetings. The sheer audacity of it made my blood sing. This was the kill shot. On a sweltering Thursday afternoon, I watched from the dense, overgrown rhododendrons of a neighbor's yard as Silas's sedan pulled up. Silas hurried inside, a bottle of wine in his hand. The heavy bass of the living room stereo began to thump. I moved quickly, crossing the lawn and slipping through that reliably unlocked back door. The house smelled of stale bleach and the lingering phantom rot of my previous handiwork. I crept into the kitchen. Odette had carelessly tossed her phone onto the marble island. My pulse hammered against my ribs as I grabbed it. No passcode. I opened her messages, found Merrick's contact, and typed with frantic precision, "Merrick, I'm so sick. Fever is spiking. Please come over right now, I need you." I left the front door unlocked. I hit send. I walked to the heavy oak front door, unlatched the deadbolt, and silently slipped back out, retreating to my camouflaged vantage point in the bushes. The wait was agonizing, every second stretching into eternity. 20 minutes later, Merrick's heavy SUV tore around the corner, tires squealing against the asphalt. He threw the vehicle into park, practically leaping out, his face etched with genuine concern for his sick fiancé. He pushed through the unlocked front door. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 minutes. Then the house erupted. The sheer volume of the screaming shattered the quiet suburban afternoon. The front door burst open. Silas stumbled out onto the porch, clutching his wrinkled dress shirt, his belt undone, his face flushed with panic. Merrick was right behind him, moving with the terrifying velocity of a man whose reality had just snapped in half. Merrick tackled his own father onto the manicured grass. Fists flew. I heard the sickening, unmistakable crunch of bone as Merrick's knuckles connected with Silas's jaw. Odette appeared in the doorway seconds later, wearing nothing but a hastily tied silk robe, her hair a disheveled mess. She was sobbing hysterically, reaching out, screaming Merrick's name, begging him to stop. Merrick shoved his bleeding father off him, stood up, and looked at Odette with a disgust so potent it practically radiated off him. He didn't say a word to her. He just turned, got into his SUV, and sped away, leaving Silas bleeding on the lawn and Odette collapsing onto the concrete steps in absolute hysterics. Silas, desperate to salvage any shred of his relationship with his son, didn't even look back at Odette. He staggered to his sedan and drove off, abandoning her completely. In the span of a few months, Odette lost her career, her reputation, and her freedom. She was trapped in a rotting, unsellable house, drowning in debt, facing criminal prosecution, and abandoned by the men she had manipulated. I never found out what the judge sentenced her to. Shortly after that spectacular afternoon, I packed my bags, cut all contact with Vance, and vanished from their lives entirely. The last thing my father ever said to me in our final phone call was a muted, weary complaint about Odette threatening to end her own life over the stress of her ruined existence. I hung up the phone, stepped out into the bright sunshine of my new life, and smiled. Some might say seeking vengeance poisons the soul, that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. But they are wrong. Sometimes handing the poison back to the person who brewed it is the only way to find the cure. If there's a lesson to be extracted from the wreckage of Odette's life, it's this. Treat the vulnerable with kindness, because the children you break today will grow up to be the architects of your tomorrow. If you enjoyed this story of absolute meticulous justice, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and share your own stories in the comments below. Let me know, did I go too far or did she get exactly what she deserved? Stay tuned and remember, karma doesn't always need a universe to balance the scales. Sometimes it just needs a teenager with a plan.